I'm very pleased to be permitted to have this fireside chat with Patrick Orlando. Patrick is the CEO of Digital World Acquisition Company, which has signed a business combination agreement with Trump Media and Technology Group. I think I got that right, TMTG. Everyone knows who President Trump is, I assume, so no introduction there needed. DWAC is in the midst of an SEC review, among other things, so Patrick's going to be limited to public information and may not be able to be as candid as he would otherwise like to, but we'll try and keep this entertaining notwithstanding. So a brief overview. DWAC went public in September of 2021, immediately started hunting for targets. You and your team talked to, I think, more than a dozen different targets, and ultimately signed a business combination with TMTG in late October. In December, you arranged a PIPE for $1 billion to support the transaction. You worked probably very hard on an S-4, which is a registration statement, and a proxy statement included in order to shareholders to approve the transaction, and you ultimately filed that in May of last year. The deal's facing unusual regulatory scrutiny, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And in November, your shareholders approved an extension to give you until September of this year to complete the deal. And if you don't do that, you'll have to go back to them again or potentially liquidate. So we'll start with some recent stuff and work backwards, and then we'll talk about the future.
Excellent.
So the extension vote was clearly a slog. You got 66% of your shareholders approved it, but so it just barely exceeded the 65% threshold that you needed. The votes you got were like 98% in favor. So everybody clearly liked it, but the issue was they just weren't voting. Your stock is the highest trading stock of SPACs with announced deals, and it has been, I think, consistently since announcement more than a year ago. So your investors clearly love this deal. Why was it hard to get the shareholder vote?
So we had multiple challenges, and hello, everybody. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you, John, for putting this together. Look, our vote was incredibly difficult for many reasons. Number one, foreign shareholders, of which we actually had a pretty large shareholding, were on platforms such as eToro, and these platforms did not participate in proxy voting. And the way that our SPAC had been set up, we needed 65% of all votes to vote in favor. That group of voters that weren't allowed to vote were automatically counted as no votes. So our universe of voters wasn't 100%. We were starting well below 100%. We had to get, instead of 65%, a far higher percentage of the actual voters that were permitted to vote, number one. Number two, the retail shareholding. I mean, our stock is probably one of the widest held by retail shareholders. Retail shareholders don't realize that their votes count sometimes. They say, hey, the company's going to take care of it. Fidelity's going to take care of it. Some big institution is going to vote, and that's enough. They know what they're voting on. We don't have to do anything. So culturally, retail shareholders don't feel like their votes count, and our DWAC vote is proof that their votes do count. We've seen in a lot of mergers, actually. I mean, I've seen a couple mergers that had to have the votes extended because they didn't get enough participation. And we are an extreme case of this because we have so many retail shareholders. So we literally went out month after month, letting people know through different means that the vote was on. Truth Social, I think we're going to touch on that later, but that was a wonderful outlet to raise the awareness. And even until the last day, we had stockholders that were calling in and saying, hey, I just found out about this vote. So the ability to get out the word about votes and that the efficiency of that is very low, I think, for the retail shareholders.
Thanks. It's interesting. I mean, this is sort of a flashback deal to like the deals of 2020 and 2021, in that it's trading meaningfully above trust and it has high retail vote. We were certainly shocked on some of our deals where we were like, well, we have to extend the meeting by a week or two because we just can't get to quorum. And it changed sort of the strategy. People had to, instead of going with a proxy solicitor who was just mailing out cards or sending emails or making calls to people above 1,000 shares or something, management teams had to start resorting to stock twits and Twitter and Reddit. So these guys that had never had a Reddit account in their life had to open one in order to try and get followers from people to vote.
And maybe I'll comment really quickly.
Sure.
We actually, so Alliance Advisors worked as our proxy solicitor, and they used basically every avenue that they had, emails and texts, to raise the awareness. We did do a session or two about the vote, and I believe that also raised awareness. We were on the social media, basically anywhere we could be to raise the awareness for this vote, and look, we were successful in the end. So I think as long as you're determined and you have enough time and you put enough resources to work, you will get the votes. You really just need to be very aggressive when you have a high retail shareholding.
So you mentioned you're active on Truth, and you've announced that you're going to use Truth as a means to basically publicize important information. How effective do you think that's been in communicating with your shareholders?
So look, there's two main components to that. One is obviously the DWAC stockholder base. Many of them are on Truth, and then there's some people on Truth, that individuals on Truth that are retruthing and quote truthing and now direct messaging. So I think it was a very effective platform to get the awareness up. There's some very enthusiastic participants on Truth Social that really assisted us with the effort.
It's fabulous. All right, let's talk about the SEC and regulatory scrutiny a little bit. So the typical process for a de-SPAC is you file a registration statement like you did with the S-4. The SEC goes back and forth with comments on it, and you respond to them. And usually after about 2 or 3 months, you're done with that process. You mail it out. Here, though, the SEC's done something a little different. And Devin Nunes, the CEO of TMTG, has basically suggested that the SEC is not producing comments. He said they're not producing comments, and TMTG has suggested that it might even pursue legal action against the SEC. So the SEC hasn't commented on your S-4 filing?
So the S-4, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm correct, your initial S-4 can be filed confidentially if it's filed in the first year from IPO.
That's correct.
We went ahead and filed publicly. If we had we filed another S-4 responding to the comments, everybody would have seen it. So,
all right, so reading between the lines, if you'd received comments, you would have responded to them. You haven't responded to them with an S-4 filing, so I'm going to infer that the SEC has not been giving you comments.
Our teams, when we get a task, the resources are put really quickly to work, and it's amazing in this SPAC business and the public companies period how enthusiastic the legal teams and auditors and financial preparers and our in-house teams are when we do have a task.
Okay, so instead of going through the normal process, the SEC has decided to instead institute an 8E investigation. This is where the SEC, their enforcement division, basically stops the process, your S-4 process, and sends you a subpoena with a whole bunch of questions. This is very rare. I've never seen one. I was able to find like 5 examples where public companies had announced that they had this. So basically, instead of going through corporation finance, which is the typical way, the SEC has decided that their enforcement decision will start asking questions. What is the SEC focused on, and can you resolve their questions by your new outside date of September of this year?
So I'm not exactly sure if the 8E itself is meant to be an impediment to the processing of the paperwork. That's kind of been a debate whether or not corporate finance and enforcement are linked. So we've been, obviously waiting for a long time to get a revised S-4 in with comments addressed if there are any. That hasn't happened to date, and we don't know what focus there is, if any, because we would have, or we will, 8K or some other way communicate to the public if we do get further back and forth and information from the SEC. So far, we've basically made everything publicly known. Even when there was questions on whether or not it should be 8K'd, we've been trying to be very transparent with the public, and we love that about the public markets. So right now, we don't have any further information.
Okay, so the background section of the S4 details communications that basically you, DWAC, you, or any of your affiliates had with TMTG or any of its affiliates. I think it's a 2-year look-back period. So it discloses that TMTG had talked to a dozen SPACs in 2021, about a potential deal, and that included one of your other SPACs, which is Benicere. And there was conversations throughout 2021 that were terminated in September, shortly before the DWAC IPO. Do you think they're focused on whether those discussions were had, sort of vis-a-vis DWAC?
So, I mean, obviously there's speculation in the press. There's speculation all over. I really don't know what's happening on behind the scenes there at the SEC. TMTG, as our potential merger partner or proposed merger partner, is the one that gave us the facts as to how many other SPACs they spoke to. So that's based on their representations. And obviously Benicere was a previous SPAC that I was involved in that did at one point have negotiations with TMTG and then eventually moved on to another target. So, we really don't know what's going on in Washington until we get a communication. And once we get that communication, we are sending it to the lawyers, and the lawyers will tell us how to communicate that to the market.
Okay. So putting aside the vote, which obviously they ultimately supported the extension, how else have they supported the transaction? And do you get the impression that they're supporting truth by being, subscribers there? Are they writing letters to the SEC? Are they writing their congressmen? What are the stockholders doing?
So the public stockholders have been, I think that we have the most enthusiastic, or close to the most enthusiastic stockholders I've ever seen. They've really been trying to communicate with the company. Obviously, we can't give anything but public information to them. They have been performing an effort where they've been writing letters. We've seen letters to reps and congressmen, so that's been very interesting. I hadn't seen that before on deals. So they've really been enthusiastic and spending their time and energy on doing what they can to move the merger forward.
That's great. So looking forward, hopefully the SEC will start actually processing your S4 and send you comments, and you'll be back on that. Given the difficulties getting the approval extension, how confident are you, or how hard do you think it'll be to get the vote out to approve the DSPAC? And can you count on former President Trump to help sort of get out the vote?
Well, look, we got the extension approved. That was very difficult. The record date was August 12th. We didn't finalize till November, so there was challenges there and awareness that wasn't raised that I do believe would be raised if we were looking at the merger vote. So I feel very confident that the awareness would be there, that would be required to let stockholders know that it was time to vote. And obviously, the president and Devin Nunes and TMTG would do their part. They committed to doing what they can to move the merger forward when they signed the definitive agreement. So that's obviously something that everyone committed to when we signed. Both parties need to use their efforts to move the deal forward. And other than that, I think everyone's committed to their businesses. I've seen the president really is on truth and he's active. Devin Nunes has been very active, and we're very active as DWAC, expending time and energy to move this forward.
Okay. So lastly, we noticed that you recently had some departures of the directors and have appointed new directors. Can you touch on that a bit?
Yes. So we obviously had some directors that were with us from the start. It's been a very challenging environment. It's been a long slog. And we just invited now 2 new directors, Edward Preble and Frank Andrews. And they're full of energy, and they really believe in trying to move this merger forward, and they've been wonderful to have on the team nowadays.
That's great. All right. Well, Patrick, thank you very much. This is enthralling, I guess. I love watching the drama around this unfold, and hopefully it comes to a speedy conclusion and the right one. But thank you very much, and thank everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.